Flex your creative muscles as you rebuild civilization, restore ecosystems, and explore a genuinely unique new world. My name is Kodiak, this is Legacy Gaming, and after myself and Livid have both gone hands-on, we're taking a look at a brand new open-world fantasy sandbox game, Towers of Aghasba. Towers of Aghasba is certainly a unique game, and one we got to play a few days early before we literally couldn't play anymore. Yes, this is the actual message we received after trying to launch the game, so calibrate your expectations accordingly. We can only assume at this point that a patch nuked the install files. This means we couldn't get as far as we normally would like to during an initial play session, but we did have enough time to really grasp onto what the game is all about. For a while, we were teetering on the fence whether or not we actually enjoyed the game, and that's largely due to how some of the game's various systems are implemented, and we'll touch on that here shortly. However, there's no denying that this game has a certain charm about it. On one hand, you have a survival crafting game where you manage item durability, gear rarity, and prepare for increasingly difficult combat areas like you'd expect. On the other hand, you have this unique blend of ecosystem management and town building that all compound to progress your character. In the opening moments of the game, you and your tribe, the Shimu, become shipwrecked on a now desolate island that once flourished under the Shimu people long ago. This and the subsequent few hours serve as a slow-paced tutorial that introduces you to many of Aghasba's core systems. There is plenty of hand-holding here, but without it, both Livid and myself would have likely been completely lost. It's paced in such a way that you dive into each system one at a time. All the while, you get to enjoy some pretty campy dialogue that had us crack a smile at least a few times. It's a good attempt to try and establish characters we should care about over time, but it doesn't quite achieve that, mainly because nothing is voiced. Instead, the developers opted for some gibberish voice effects similar to that of The Sims, something we don't personally love here on the channel. It's also great that the game features a climbing and glider system similar to that of Zelda, and you have access to that pretty much out of the gate, which helps the tightly structured tutorial feel a bit less cumbersome. There's nothing worse than getting a glider late in your progression in an exploration-focused game, so we felt that was worth pointing out. Right off the rip, you'll notice that the world is extremely barren, and that's by design. Resources are scarce, but that's okay initially because you don't really go through a huge amount of them for your base level progression. What is frustrating is that a lot of the resources in the world blend in so well that you almost miss them at times. There are tiny little arrow icons that pop up when you're in proximity, but it is legitimately so small it might as well not even exist. Your goal over time is to locate seeds of varying potencies and plant them in appropriate biome types, gradually expanding the lush flora that replaces the barren wasteland and restores ecosystems. As you do so, fantastical creatures of all shapes and sizes will begin to return to these areas, and the variety of these creatures is staggering. You can almost feel the Studio Ghibli inspiration in their designs, and we genuinely hope they play a large part in the ongoing gameplay, making the world feel alive the further you progress. We simply don't know the answer to that because, again, we had to stop playing. Using your Shimu scope, a sort of cataloging device, you can analyze and catalog these creatures into these Shimu decks. In a way, it feels a bit like Pokemon trying to capture all the different creatures because this ends up helping you in another way. When cataloged, you gain access to knowledge of what that creature prefers to eat, its overall temperament, and what it can drop when either fed or killed. This portion about feeding the creature or killing it is also super important because of the system known as amity. The Shimu people are wildly in tune with nature compared to other humans, and you specifically possess an amulet and innate ability to gain amity as a stored resource every time you do something that furthers the growth of an ecosystem, such as planting new trees, crops, or even feeding the local wildlife. On the other hand, every time you take from the environment, be that killing a creature or over-farming an area, you will lose amity. Maintaining a balance of this resource is crucial because you'll need to spend it in order to supercharge the growth of specific plants and for other elements within the world. This ends up creating a natural need to garden and replace the flora and fauna you take from the world, which was a really refreshing mechanic in a survival game and one we think will be a huge selling point of this game. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this would be an awesome mechanic in future survival games, so developers, take note. As you're doing this, you'll also work on building settlements, and this is another unique aspect of Towers of Aghasba. In most survival games, you simply make a crafting station and build an abstract base to house it. However, in this game, that couldn't be more different. Instead, you're building entire prefab structures that then come with things like crafting stations, storage, farms, and more. You do have a little additional control being able to place individual items and decorations, but by and large, prefabs make up a huge portion of the building in this game. Your goal is to arrange these in a way that you build a functioning settlement, and as your village grows, so does the Shimu population. We only got to play around with a handful of these structures before we lost access to the game files, but we found it to be a genuinely cool way to approach this aspect of a survival experience. From here, you'll go out exploring the larger continent once you cross a huge broken bridge, and your goal will remain the same. Purge the corruption that is blighting the world, dispatching the terrors that are being produced, and slowly bring back nature to this barren wasteland. We aren't entirely sure what more there is past that point because again, we simply couldn't, but that alone was enticing enough as a gameplay loop, at least for now, as the game enters early access. Now, I wish I could say Towers of Aghasba was all sunshine and rainbows, but there are a few areas of the game that we either disliked or felt just hadn't been fully realized at this point. For instance, the game features a lot of modern systems in terms of item management, where your chests in your town are all accessible by the crafting stations or interactables themselves without you constantly needing to take things out and put them away. That's great. Where it wasn't so great was the actual resource management part of that system. A lot of the quality of life features simply weren't working, such as being able to transfer items quickly into a box. So that turned into a long manual process, which then led us to discover that there isn't even a default stacking mechanic for items. Your inventory fills up incredibly fast, so this was a frustrating element of the early game and the current state of the game that we had access to. Then you get into crafting. The actual process of crafting is fine and works exactly how you'd expect in any survival game. You learn the recipe, collect the materials, and craft the item, but once said things are crafted is where we start to run into problems. Crafting tools and weapons places them in your inventory, which you can then assign to a radio wheel to quickly access them. Unlike other survival games, however, where your equipped items don't take up inventory space and sit in their own slot, these do. You'll have a lot of them, so immediately your inventory gets cut down significantly if you want to maintain having access to most tools and weapon types, because it becomes quite cumbersome to farm for resources when your inventory is constantly filling up. I'll also say that placing crafted items in the game is not an exact science, and right now, there are a lot of issues restricting where you can place things, which became a bit of a problem. Additionally, despite there being a button prompt to harvest any resource node, you physically have to equip the required tool every time you need to do so. Now, we understand this is normally how it's handled in survival games, but in Aghasba, multiple resources can and very often are right in front of you, and each requires a different tool. Having to manually swap tools every time instead of the button prompt that already pops up just feels tedious. It's almost like the game is teasing you every time instead of feeling natural for you to pull out the correct tool. There's also some durability issues. With most survival games, if items begin to wear down, you can simply repair them either from your inventory for basic tier items or from a workbench for higher tier items. At no point could we find a way to repair items, we simply had to let them break, disappear, and craft another one. This further compounds the inventory issue because keeping 4 resources to make one tool is inefficient, but having to carry a second copy of said tool is where things become frustrating. Lastly, movement and combat at this point isn't something to write home about, but to be clear, it's also not going to make you upset with the game. It's simply there and functions okay, but animations and how your character snaps to things can feel really janky at times. Both the early spear and the bow felt decent, with the bow actually being a solid early game weapon that fits the theme of the game nicely, but we want to see a lot more depth and refinement with the combat system at launch and beyond. There's a decent amount of fighting in the game as you deal with blighted enemies and hostile creatures, and you want a system that responds well to that and grows with you, not something that's just serviceable. All in all, Towers of Aghasba is a really interesting mixed bag. On one hand, the concept is great and the team introduces some fun, unique systems into a genre that doesn't often get much innovation. On the other hand, quite a few of these features could do with some serious polish. Luckily, the game is entering into early access, and that's exactly what this period of time should be used for: refinement along with adding new content. The team has also announced their roadmap ahead of launch, where a ton of awesome things look to be coming, such as new gliders, new regions and quests, an influx of new multiplayer-focused experiences, new biomes, and a whole lot more. Clearly, the team has a direction. All they need to do is polish, execute, and deliver, and Towers of Aghasba might be a hit. Friends, we hope you enjoyed our thoughts on the game. Towers of Aghasba is available now in early access for PC and PlayStation 5, with no signs of it coming to Xbox anytime soon. As always, if you appreciate the work that goes into making these videos, do me a solid, hit that thumbs up, and consider subscribing. My name is Kodiak, and from everyone here at Legacy Gaming, thanks for watching, and play on.